Welcome back to another episode of 310 to Left. I'm Alex Speier of the Boston Globe, joined this week by Natalie Noury, the WooSox sideline reporter for Nesson. Tom Karen is on special assignment, likely on the high seas, clearly unavailable and in hiding. Natalie, it's great to have you joining us. It's a really interesting time of year to be talking about baseball and to be talking about the Red Sox. The July 30th trade deadline is looming ever closer. Yesterday was a massive day. Well, this is going to be airing on Friday, so Wednesday was a significant day in the Red Sox build-up towards the trade deadline with Alex Cora officially signing a 3-year extension that's going to keep him with the Red Sox through 2027, and in doing so saying it's because he wants to win, and he's been given assurances that that's what the Red Sox want to do as well. Craig Breslow telling me in no uncertain terms that the Red Sox intend to be buyers, that they're looking to add right-handed bat, to add starting pitching, and or to add relief pitching. What do you make of all of this, of all that's transpiring? How much do you think that the Red Sox are an organization that's kind of sitting on the cusp of change over the course of the next few days?
Yeah, well, first of all, Alex, it's a pleasure to be here. Honored to join you on this and join the conversation on all of this because it is an exciting time to see Alex Cora got extended. I know that was something that my family was excited about. I was excited about. I'm glad that they invested in him because he seems to do well with all the guys that have emerged under him, developed under him, and have continued to play well in his clubhouse as well. So I think in terms of everything that's transpiring, I think it was just kind of common knowledge that this year was supposed to be kind of like a rebuilding transitional year, and somehow we've worked our way up to talking about playoffs and contention for all that kind of stuff. So I think the trade deadline is kind of coming at an interesting time for the organization, just because there are so many unexpected things emerging, and there's a lot of conversation as to what we need. Like you talked about pitching, starting pitchers, right-handed bats. I know in the Worcester clubhouse we have a couple guys we could talk about, but in terms of all of that, it's just been interesting to kind of pick and choose what is going to be a headliner for us coming up in the next week.
Well, it is interesting, and I'm glad that you're able to bring kind of the perspective of someone who's been around the WooSox quite a bit, because the fact that Craig Breslow is making it explicit that the Red Sox are looking to add from outside the organization means that they aren't completely sold on the internal solutions to those needs. Nonetheless, it's kind of worth thinking about some of the players who represent maybe solutions, right? Like where that's the bar you're trying to clear in terms of you want an upgrade over X guy. So I want to take as a couple of examples. Right-handed bats. There's some interesting ones in Worcester. Certainly Nick York is a name that's known as a 2020 first-round pick who's been playing very well since he moved up from Portland to Worcester this year. Chase Mydroth is one of the best on-base guys in all of minor league baseball. Yep. He's a right-handed hitter. He can play a couple of different infield positions. And I should also bring up Nick Sogard, who's maybe less of a prominent name in terms of the prospect community, but switch hitter who can play, who's a pretty good defender at multiple positions. What do you make of, if you were to look at right-handed bats in Worcester right now who are major league ready or close to major league ready, where do you start?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with those three, Alex, because first of all, you look at Nick Sogard, switch hitter. He's a natural righty, but he has been one of our more consistent players on both sides of the ball this year. It was actually funny. We've seen him take his first couple reps at first base as well defensively this year, and he's done pretty well there, but he's versatile on defense, but then when it comes to his plate approach, he is consistent. He has done some things in his career this year that he has struggled with past, and I think like someone like him, he's been in the organization for a little while. I think he's been in AAA for 2, maybe 3 seasons now. I mean, he's hitting 276 currently. So he's a guy that you look at when you look for someone consistent, an all-around really good player who could be, in the conversation for that kind of thing. I think Chase Mydroth is another one who has been with us all season. So he might be kind of comfortable in that role as well. Now, something about him that's funny, I think he's walked 72 times this year. I think the only person who's walked more than him is Jackson Holliday currently in AAA. I think he's 74. Those stats might have changed a little bit by the time this airs, but he has no problem getting on base. And it's kind of fun to watch him because you watch him go up And I know in the clubhouse, they even have internal like challenges as to, who had the best at bats, who had the best on base percentage over the past couple of months. And Chase Mydroth from May, June, July, and even projected in August, he's expected to win that honor again in the clubhouse. So he's consistent as well when it comes to that. I think York has been a pleasant surprise. I think he was doing okay in Double-A, and all of a sudden he comes up to Triple-A and he's doing great. He's what is he batting? 313 over 300, and he's done that. But he seems confident. He's kind of confident in his skin. It's fun to watch him play defense. I know we've had him in the outfield a couple times, but he hasn't been at AAA as long. So while he's projected to come up eventually and make an impact, you almost wonder if maybe a guy like Sogard or Mydroth might be closer to that. But then you can also take a step back and say, if the Red Sox thought that they were going to be difference makers right now, they might already be up, which is why maybe they're looking at the trade market right now. So they've got a couple of options, which I do like, but you have to wonder, why haven't they gone up yet kind of thing. Maybe they'll come up later in the year just so they can get a look, but all those guys definitely deserve a chance just to be looked at.
Players in AAA want to be in the big leagues, right? Like this is not a great secret. You're like, it's so tantalizing. It's all within reach. How much curiosity do you sense forming in the WooSox clubhouse about, where come next week, will I be in a different organization, and will it be an organization where I have either an immediate path or a clearer path to getting up to the big leagues?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. First of all, the team, they haven't been home since before the All-Star break. So we haven't seen them in quite a while, but I know that at least in the clubhouse, the players just try to take the mentality of we'll control what we can control. I think it's a little more of a heightened awareness probably for manager Chad Tracy. His phone goes off all the time. And I was talking to a friend, Tyler Murray, just about what the road trip has been like. And I guess it's just a heightened awareness around this time of year for, what might happen. So as far as the players, it's interesting, too, because I've gotten to know the players. I've gotten to know their families. I've gotten to know their personalities, the friendships that are within the clubhouse. And I think while they try to just stay even keel with the deadline looming, I think it probably is in the back of their minds, but they're just trying to stay even keel, go into every day, continue to do what they do. And it's crazy because I'll be there on the 30th. I'll be in Worcester, and they could go through their pregame routine, they could go through all their stretching and get dressed, and all of a sudden they find out they're traded. So it could be a certain apprehension coming into the day, but you try your best to try to stay emotionally even about it, which I'm sure is tough.
The proverbial hug watch will be on July 30th, and Nesson is going to have the trade deadline show on that day. So, so you're going to be our eyes on the ground, and certainly in Worcester, and that's going to be a super valuable thing. I should ask, as we think about curiosity that exists in Worcester, and whether or not thoughts of kind of remaining grounded or looking beyond the horizon take hold. How much curiosity is there about when the big three is going to be moving up from Portland? Certainly, I've been wondering that since I would say late June. How antsy are people getting in Worcester for that to happen? Do you have any best guesses as to when that might happen?
I mean, it's certainly been a conversation among us as a staff, because I know media-wise, when they come up, it's going to be a hot topic. So when they come up, we've been trying to prepare for anything to happen. I think in terms of what's on record, we have talked to Chad Tracy about when he thinks a timeline might be possible. We checked in with him after the All-Star break, and he had mentioned that we'll wait to the deadline, kind of see how things look around there. But even now, there's no definite answer as to when they might come up. I mean, I know there's a lot of excitement that surrounds it, but we would love to see, there's not much more that Meyer can prove at the level he's at currently. So, of course, he deserves to be in AAA. We'd love to see him there, but I don't think we have a definite timeline as to what to expect yet. I think we kind of do have to wait for the deadline and see what the Red Sox want to do, because then that'll move the pieces internally to open some spots up potentially for them to come up. But I think, they want to keep the three together. They want Anthony, Teal, and Meyer together. You look at Anthony, and he's a bit younger, so I'm not exactly sure when he's projected to come up. I think it's safer to assume, it's only speculation, but safer to assume that Teal and Meyer would come up together. So I don't know. I don't have a timeline for you directly, but I know that we are on watch in Worcester, and I mean, I expect it to be, something that sparks conversation in the next couple weeks.
Well, we are all on watch for not only that, but also, of course, for the trade deadline. And so with that in mind, you and I are going to have a conversation coming up here with Zack Scott of Four Rings Solutions. He's currently a consultant working with a number of sports teams across different sports. But his primary background is in baseball. He spent several years in the Red Sox front office, including a number of them as a Red Sox assistant general manager before he joined the Mets, where he served as an interim general manager. So Zach has incredible experience at the Major League Baseball trade deadline, insight into what the dynamics are like. So without further ado, let's have Zack Scott join us on 310 to Left. Joined now on 310 to Left by Zack Scott of Four Rings Solutions and formerly the Red Sox assistant GM, as well as Mets interim GM. Zach, it is great to see you. How are you, and are you engaged and excited for being a spectator at a trade deadline season?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me, and it's good to see you guys too. I'm doing well. I'm excited. It's actually this will be my first trade deadline since, I guess, 2003 was the last time I wasn't directly involved with the trade deadline. So it's been a long time where I'm looking at it from the outside. I've been doing some media work and looking at it from that perspective. So I'm excited to get a different view of it.
Well, before we jump into some of the experiences that you have had, which I think are just fascinating and should really help to inform this moment in time, both for the Red Sox and for other teams, I wanted to ask whether or not the news of yesterday was twofold in Red Sox land. First, that Alex Cora was getting extended, that they have now reached an agreement with him to stay around as Red Sox manager through 2027. Secondly, Craig Breslow took us off the fence and said that the Red Sox are going to be looking to upgrade the 2024 team. Curious for your initial reactions. Are you surprised that a whole 6 days before the trade deadline, Craig Breslow was declaring the Red Sox as buyers? And are you surprised, after all of the questions over the last few months about whether Alex Cora would be back, that he's going to be back?
Yeah, I was really happy to see the news on Alex. I love Alex. I think what he's done with this roster is really impressive. Not surprising in the sense that he's so good at getting the most out of his talent, but I'm really happy for him and his family, and that he's got some security there, and a good move by the Red Sox. As far as what Craig said, I think it's great. I mean, I guess I'm not surprised. I think they're in a position where they have an opportunity to, make the wild card, and now that it's not just a one-game coin flip game, they have a better chance than when it used to be those rules, to win a 3-game series. And so I think what makes me happy about that, to hear that, is that they're picking a lane, and I think that's what's most important. Now, does it mean that they're all in on rentals and things like that? It probably shouldn't mean that. It probably should mean they're looking to get either value deals on rentals or deals that help them for both this year and in the future.
Now, Zach, I kind of wanted to touch on your relationship a little more with Alex Cora. I know that you had a nice communicative based relationship with him back in 2018 and whatnot, but to see what happened and to kind of walk us through the process of the decision to make this a pleasant surprise for the organization mid-season, what was the process that went into this? And could you explain a little bit about what your relationship was like with Alex Cora and what made it so special?
Yeah, I met Alex. Well, we had him as a player, but as when we hired him as a manager, we right away connected. He was coming from the Astros, where they were very analytically inclined, and so he had been exposed to a lot of tools there to use to help them on the field, and he wanted something similar in Boston, and so it was great. We connected right away. There was a lot he wanted to do. He was very engaged, and we went and did a ton of good work for him. The people in the analytics department did great work, and collaborated with the coaching staff to try to get everyone on the same page for this kind of new way that he wanted to do things. As far as his contract extension, I mean, I can't speak to the details of how that happened, but I know Alex has always spoken fondly of his time in Boston, and there's a lot of people there that he's closely connected to. And so I'm sure that feels good for him. Also, he's got to balance that with looking at, what Craig Counsell got with the Cubs last year, changing the market for managers. And, maybe you have to go become a free agent to get that, but it seems like he got pretty close to that on a shorter term. And so good for him. I'm happy for him.
So getting to the question of picking a lane, that is an interesting one, right? And you've been through the exercise of having to figure that out, like not being necessarily certain about what lane you pick. I feel like, there have been times more than just last year. Obviously, everyone is coming off of a 2023 season in which there was this kind of suggestion that like the Red Sox did nothing. In 2022, there was the like kind of ambivalence of how the Red Sox approached the deadline, where it was, they dealt Christian Vazquez for Wilyer Abreu and Emmanuel Valdez. In retrospect, great deal. But at the same time, they kind of made these ads that were they made these marginal upgrades for Eric Hosmer, and it was kind of like they were trying to do a little bit of both, and it ended up being a little confusing. You've been part of past Red Sox deadlines where the team was interested in upgrading and did nothing. I think back to, for instance, 2005, 2006. You've been part of deadlines where you were on the fence. 2012 being a great example, where the Red Sox were within arm's reach of a wild card spot at the deadline, ended up basically holding pat, and then watching the team collapse. What goes into a front office's decision? Like, what are those last days like leading up to a deadline? How much are you living and dying with like standing shifts, those, day-to-day standing shifts that are kind of anathema to what the 162 game schedule is about?
Yeah, I think you have to be really careful to not be living and dying, as you said, with the day to day and each game result. Unless you go into a stretch when you're about, 10 days or so from a deadline, you kind of look at it as, we have several games. It should take quite a bit. Either you win 8 out of those 10, you lose 8 out of those 10 for it to really change the direction you're going in. So you don't want to be in that spot, but you're human, and that can happen as you're doing the moment. I think more recently 2019 as a place where we were kind of on the fence, close to a wild card, trying to figure out whether we should buy or sell, and Mookie Betts being like the key guy. Do we sell him now, knowing that we'd probably trade him in the offseason? That was a huge decision to make. And unfortunately, we had a hot stretch right before the deadline where we won a few games against the Yankees. Mookie hit 3 homers. And, we decided to not make a move there. And I think we probably could have done better by the organization if we did at that time. And then, of course, we, lose 8 straight games and then are out of it. So those decisions are hard. I think you have to, take a big picture look. It's hard to ride the fence. It's hard to sell and buy. I think that's been the mistake in the past, is if you're going to sell, just sell and do what's best for the future. If you're going to do what's best try to improve the present team, well, it's hard to subtract and add, and actually you're not going to improve the team when you do that. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul type of thing. And so, pick one direction and go with it. Now, you can do that in different ways, as I mentioned before. If you're going to buy, but you're in this kind of position that the Red Sox find themselves in now, then, maybe you take it just a different approach on the types of players that you're bringing in, rentals versus controllable players.
Yeah, although there's going to be a scarcity of controllable players, or you have to make that decision of, okay, we're willing to deal from the very top of our farm system. Natalie and I were just talking about the big 3 in Portland of Marcelo Meyer, Roman Anthony, Kyle Teal, who are generally viewed, like the Red Sox identified them last offseason as basically being their future and when they expected to contend. And so it would be an awfully interesting pivot to me if they wanted to get into the controllable market for starting pitchers, the Garrett Crochets of the world, the Scoobles of the world. You aren't doing that without at least one of those guys in the conversation, right, and maybe more than that. Who sets that direction? How does a decision about, like, when you're on the fence, like when it's not just crystal clear, like, we're buyers this year. Right. How, who are the different who are the different stakeholders who contribute to that decision, and who has final say over we're buying or we're selling?
Right. Well, I think it's, who's leading your baseball operation. So in this case, Craig Breslow, works with his team in baseball ops to figure out what they believe is the right direction for the club. And then they communicate that to ownership and say, this is what we believe and here's why. And oftentimes there's a conversation there, whether, they may push back on it, they may just, rubber stamp it, but there's usually a conversation, and there could be just a conversation for them to gain understanding. It could be a disagreement. And so you got to kind of pound the table as that person in Craig's seat. But it's really up to that person. I think that's one of the things that John Henry generally has done a good job of in the past when I was there, was empowering that leader to make the case, to make that decision and move forward with it. But yeah, I agree. As far as those top three guys, you probably aren't moving. When I say controllable players, I don't necessarily mean those impact guys, because they are going to cost a lot, and probably, I'm not sure the Red Sox are only one player away from winning a championship. So maybe that's, pushing all your chips in the middle is probably not the right move. But there are some guys, it's acquiring the starting pitcher that has an extra year of control versus, the guy that's purely a rental.
Now you mentioned about doing what's best for the future, picking a lane, and we've established that we're planning on investing. We're going to put some money into this, which is great. But you also mentioned empowering the leader when it comes to the decision making in these scenarios. But what if there is some owner pushback, for example, and what do you have any examples as to times that might have happened that created some kind of difficulty at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's healthy for there to be disagreement at that top level. I mean, it's ultimately the owner's team, right? So it's their money. It's they own this team, but they also are not the experts on putting a team together. That's not why they own the team. They need to empower that person to do that. So, I think again there can be pushback. You as the person in that top seat, what you really want to know is, what are the parameters I'm working with? And then you want to do your best job within that. So that's a budget. It's that sort of thing, but it's really up to that person to set the vision, the baseball vision for how things are going. And it's fair for an owner to question that vision, but there should be a good dialogue, and you should reach a consensus on the direction together.
Does the budget shift? Like how does the are you given okay, we're going to give you a $3 million bag to play with, or or well, you can use prospects, but this has to be financially neutral. What are the so much has been made of how much the Red Sox are or are not spending, right? So I'm just curious, how does that part of the dialogue unfold as the deadline nears?
Yeah, before I said, you as the person that top seat, you want that information. It doesn't mean you always get it. So a lot of times in my tenure with the Red Sox, it was a floating target, which is difficult to navigate. So there's times where I can recall we felt like we needed to get under a certain number. We needed to cut the payroll, and got close to doing a deal with a prominent player on our team to do that. And then all of a sudden we switched directions. Said, no, I don't want to do that. So let's make an exception, and we can keep the payroll this high. And so that makes it challenging. And so the hope is that you've had this dialogue well before the deadline, to say kind of here's our vision for what we want to do. Do we have that support both financially and just from a vision standpoint? And then you go and execute on it. So there should be good, clear communication between Craig and the ownership group, but ultimately you want to know what that is. And maybe it's complicated. Maybe it's for these types of players, here's where we're willing to go. But if there's an opportunity to get a special level of player, then here's the flexibility that we have. And maybe it's different, and hopefully it's communicated very clearly. It isn't always that way.
Now, we know that the trade deadline looming is probably weighing more so. Alex and I talked about this before. Maybe the general or the managers of the team are a little more aware of what's going on. The teams try to keep everything internal and just kind of focus on the day-to-day, the games. But, what is the difficulty of the deadline, and what are the most chaotic deadlines that happen during the trade deadline?
Well, we had a lot of chaotic deadlines through my time with the Red Sox. So it is really hard. I mean, one of the hardest things is there are games going on, and you're, the general manager or the president of baseball operations is trying to improve the team, and is trying to be very objective and dispassionate about it and make these decisions that they think are best for the organization. But the reality is there's human beings involved, and human beings are emotional. And so you're also managing that dynamic where, a lot of teams, people are on edge going into the deadline. And then there's emotions after the deadline sometimes that you have to manage. So that is the reality. And that person that's in that top seat in baseball ops has to manage that. And that can be challenging. As far as chaotic deadlines, I mean, we traded Nomar Garciaparra a minute left at the deadline. It was a 4-team trade, very complicated. That was my first deadline. I was an intern, and so observing that process was incredible to see. We had a similar situation with Manny Ramirez when we traded him. I mean, we've been involved in a lot of huge deals and a lot of deals that happen really late.
One thing that's always interested me about deadline deals, like Baseball America, someone with Baseball America recently wrote a recap of top 100 prospects who had been moved at the deadline in recent years, I think the last decade. And almost none of them had made a major league impact, right? Like,
Right.
There's a lot of fretting about giving up future value at the deadline. And yet the frequency with which that ends up being costly future value, you guys had, in some of your last years, well, with the Mets, you had the experience of giving up a guy who we think is going to have future value, but hasn't yet, right? Like in terms of emerging as a clear-cut everyday big leaguer in Pete Armstrong. With the Red Sox, there was no one cared about Santiago. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate this, but no one was paying attention when Santiago Espinal was dealt. He ended up being the all-star, but the more highly reputed guys like Anderson Espinoza traded for Drew Pomerantz, which led to shock and awe. Like, he is currently pitching in Japan and healthy for the first time basically since that trade. What's the reality of prospect value that's given up at the trade deadline? Like, do people spend too much time agonizing about the likely future value that they're giving up?
Absolutely. I mean, and especially you said that look back was done over the last decade. Was that right? Was it a decade?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
I'd
say especially in the last decade, there's been this, public focus and lots of people that, have websites focusing on prospects. And there's just this, and I'd say even within the game, a lot of, and this may be part of why they're seeing those results, a lot of teams that are really hesitant to give up their prospects. And so by selection bias, they're giving up the guys that are least likely to be impactful, in theory, right? If you're more careful with what you give up. So yeah, I think that's definitely the case. My philosophy has always been you focus on the few guys that you think are going to be a part of the next core, the next great team that you're going to have, this team that's going to have at least a 5-year window of success to make a run at a championship. And so if I'm looking at the Red Sox, maybe it's those top 3 guys that you just say, hey, these are the guys, we're not moving, no one's untouchable, but realistically in the type of deals that you can make, we're not moving these guys, but anyone else is on the table in some combination.
Now, you brought up an interesting point there. You said, there were, different websites that exist now. Things have kind of changed within the last decade when it comes to value of prospects and whatnot right now. But with the deadline approaching, how has this increase in media, in the internet, possibly posed external challenges from these organizations? Do you think they kind of tune it out, or do you think they take it into consideration with everything that happens now online?
I think the baseball ops groups, typically, at least the good ones, are good at tuning that out. You can't be focused on that because, quite honestly, people don't want to, a lot of people don't want to trade prospects. I recently proposed an idea trade for the Yankees on a New York station, and people went crazy with what, I was saying what prospects they should give up. And it's just the nature of the beast. Like, people are risk averse. And so it's safer to hold on to your prospects than it is to give them up. People don't hold it against you if those prospects then flame out and you held on to them. But if you trade them away and they go become great somewhere else, then that could be problematic. So it's really important to tune that out and do what you think is best for your organization. You don't want to get in this spot where you're so afraid of the, you have loss aversion. You're afraid of losing it that you just hold your guys and get paralyzed by that. I look at it kind of like how it used to be that coaches in the NFL didn't want to go for it on 4th down as much as probably they should, because it's a really bad look when you fail. but you're not going to fail as much. It should help you actually win more games. It's kind of a similar thing.
What was the proposed trade for the Yankees?
Oh, it was so basically the question was, what is a deal that they could do? And so the point I was trying to make was a realistic deal to say, they could go get Jazz Chisholm, but it's probably going to take a package of Spencer Jones and a couple other decent prospects that I named to get him. And I think, Spencer Jones is their number 2 prospect, so everyone kind of flips out. And it's like, well, I'm just saying, you're not getting a Skubal with Spencer Jones as the headliner, but you might be able to get a player like Chisholm, who's a good player with some upside, but he's, has some flaws as well. But my point was to bring a realistic trade scenario out there, because I think people, especially fans of a team, they want to get something big for nothing, and that's just not the reality of it. And so, yeah, it might hurt, but you have to decide who are the guys that are going to be the impact players over their major league control years compared to what you're getting.
Now we've talked about the Yankees. Enough about the Yankees. Let's talk about the Red Sox a little bit. So, what are some realistic trades that you think could happen?
Well, I haven't spent a ton of time bearing down on the Red Sox. It does seem to me that what stands out to them is starting pitching depth being a challenge for them. So I would think that's where they look to go. I think Craig came out and said pitching and then maybe a right-handed bat. But to me, the thing that stands out is that they've had very little margin for error given some of the injuries that they've had. To kind of shore up some of that starter depth would probably be the most impactful thing for them.
Now, I'm just going to jump in.
I am curious. Oh, go ahead, Natalie. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to jump in real quick. You mentioned the injuries, and what kind of a challenge does that pose when projecting what kind of team you're trying to finish the year with, especially with the trade deadline coming up?
Yeah, that's really challenging because you only have so much information in that moment. So, and you only have one shot now. You used to have August to try to address some of the injuries. So you're trying to address the injuries you know of and the injuries that are probably likely to happen down the road. And that's really hard to project. And so it's a challenge. You want to use this one major opportunity to cover as much as you can without knowing what's going to happen. So oftentimes I feel like you hear people talk a lot more about looking for people with versatility. And I think that's a part of the reason why in this era where you only have the July trade deadline and no longer have the waiver deadline is your opportunities to address different issues. There's just fewer of them.
So this is the fact that the Red Sox have now picked their lane. It is super interesting because we're only 6 months removed from Craig Breslow also stating explicitly, we are not going to be sacrificing future wins for 2024 wins, right? Like there had been. Do you think that the Red Sox are surprised to be in a position where they are now willing to give up future wins for 2024 wins? And what's been your view of how the Red Sox have been operating strategically over the course of the last handful of months?
Am I surprised that they're in this position? I guess a little bit. I don't know if they are. I'm guessing by just kind of some of the behavior in terms of acquisitions in the offseason that, they objectively knew, that they weren't probably going to contend for the division. I think they thought that there was a chance that they could be in the wild with an extra wild card. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot to be in that race. If you can be around 500, you can be in that race. To be over 5. If you're on pace to win 85 games, you have a decent chance. So, I think a lot of teams think that way now. Like there's some chance, and so let's wait and see how we're doing, and then when we have more information, then we can make more of a decision at that point, which is now, on whether we want to add to this team or if we don't believe in them, whether we look toward exclusively towards the future.
The other interesting part of that is kind of like thinking through the record versus the underlying stuff that goes into the record, right? Like the Red Sox run differential took a massive hit yesterday because they gave up 3,000 runs in one game in Coors Field. How much? Yeah, what factors go into figuring out how good your team is? How sustainable being? Like, is it just a matter of their record says that they are within a game of the wild card, and so that's what you have to respond to. Or right now, their run differential lags well behind that of Minnesota, it lags well behind that of Kansas City, and certainly the other American League East teams. Does that kind of does that diminish? Does something like that? I shouldn't say that intrinsically, but something like that. Those kinds of components dampen what a team might do at the deadline.
It could. I mean, you need to make a decision on who you think you are, most likely, and what you believe in going forward. Everything you do when you're in the front office is looking forward. When we acquire this guy, how is he going to impact our team? What do we think the rest of our team's going to do going forward? So typically in a given season, you have players who are underperforming and some are overperforming and some are right on what you'd expect. So you have to take a deep look at what's underneath those numbers, those run margins, and figure out, what are our guys likely to do going forward? Our reality is our record now. We can't change that. So here we are now, but what are we doing going forward? And then how will that position us in terms of two things: making the postseason, and then if we make it, making a run at a championship. And maybe when you're in this position, you look at it purely as just making the postseason, and then anything else is kind of a bonus after that. So I think you need to look at more detail at kind of your expectations for each individual, and then kind of what cumulatively that adds up to over these next few months.
I'd like to kind of wrap up with this. Like, when you think back to those, you said that this is the first time that you get to be in a detached position, which I suppose means also not a sleep-starved position as the deadline approaches. Like, how do you make sense of, how would you describe the chaos of, as we get down to the last 96 hours, the last 48 hours, the last 24 hours? What is that working environment like? Is it like the trade floor of a stock exchange, or like, trading places style? You have people screaming back and forth at each other. What does it look like inside of the room where it happens as the trade deadline approaches? And will you miss it, or are you grateful for the sanity of a respite?
Well, it can look a lot of different ways. It depends who's leading the operation. For many years at the Red Sox, I would call it an unhealthy environment. We sat in a conference room for hours on end, essentially staring at each other, because you can't control when other teams get back to you on things. You're brainstorming ideas, but at some point you hit a wall. And in fact, it can be counterproductive to do it that way. And I'm sure a lot of teams still do it that way. Get out, stretch your legs, get some fresh air, get the creativity flowing, and you're just sitting in a room. I knew I always had to step out to go do some thinking. Or when I actually finally went home for the night, some of my best ideas would come on that drive home or in the shower the next morning. It's just having that quiet to be able to think is important. And I think there were too many times where we were staring at each other. But then different leaders did it differently, where we just meet when there was something really to talk about, which was something I preferred. I ran a trade deadline room in 2021 and had a lot of people in there. Some people keep it small. I had a lot of people just for development reasons for some of them, but also just good ideas can come from anywhere. But I wanted to keep it as a reasonable time, make sure people got out of that room, because I thought it would create better opportunities for creativity if we kept taking breaks rather than just staring at each other. But as far as the chaos, I mean, as someone who at one point in my career was part of executing a trade, it could get very stressful, where it was like the stock market floor, where, I'm at my computer ready to kind of put the transaction in and hit submit to the commissioner's office and do all those mechanics. And there's people kind of, the GM's on the phone and someone's in there relaying, yelling across the office to me to hit the button or keep holding or whatever it may be, as I'm watching the official clock and the MLB system kind of tick down. So it can be really stressful like that. And then there's other times where you're just kind of deflated because there's no action and you weren't able to accomplish your objectives.
That's kind of funny. I feel like you're describing a movie there, but you talked about running a trade deadline room back in 2021. What were some of the tactics that you brought in that you thought kind of made it a healthier, less intense environment from your leadership perspective?
Well, I came in with an agenda in terms of what I wanted to focus on and what I wanted people to be actually doing. How are they going to spend their time in that room? I didn't want it to be this unhealthy thing where you're just kind of sitting there. Yes, I wanted some people just to observe for their own personal development. But for me, it was to create groups of people and say, here's your assignment. I want you to drill down on this. Here's another group might have a different assignment. And then, in a half an hour, let's talk through those ideas. There was a lot of that. And so, there's also just off the cuff stuff that's happening as well. But I wanted to go in there with some organized activities for people to do that were helpful. So, I knew there were a lot of good people there that could contribute, and I wanted to get their help.
Well, Zach, this has been tremendous. Really value and appreciate the perspective born of incredible numbers of experiences. Once again, Zack Scott of Four Ring Solutions does a lot of work consulting with sports teams across the board. I assume that you're going to be in the healthy remove of covering this trade deadline, probably making some contributions with SNY and some other media outlets, including your podcast. But thank you for joining our little podcast, Zach. Really great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Enjoy the trade deadline. It's a fun time of year. I always love it.